Podcast Ad Metrics Guidelines, International Podcast Day, and Adweek on branded podcasts.
Welcome to the Richard Daly Podcast, bringing you a UK perspective on the latest news and developments from the world of podcasting and internet radio.
Welcome to episode 17. I am your host, Richard Daly. Let's start with the next radio conference, which takes place on the 15th of September in London. The organiser, James Cridland, has now released the full lineup of speakers. If you were on the fence about attending this event, this might well help you make up your mind. Personally, I'm excited to hear Tom Webster, who is the Vice President of Strategy and Marketing at Edison Research. Now, this is a guy who really knows his stats, and he's done quite a lot of work around the metrics of podcasting. Other interesting speakers include Ben Bowler from Chew.tv. Chew.tv are a UK-based live streaming platform. They've got a community now of over 25,000 DJs and producers, and they're broadcasting shows live on their network every week. Some of my old internet radio colleagues that I used to work with on the Ideal Club World station are now broadcasting on Chew.tv, and it's a service I'm definitely keen to try soon myself. I'm also interested to hear from Francis Curry. I used to subscribe to his radio show prep service, which is excellent. Tickets for the next radio conference are still available. They're priced at just £149 plus VAT, which you've got to admit is pretty cheap these days for a full-day event. Link in the show notes, of course, richarddaly.com/17. Talking of James Cridland, in his newsletter this week he highlights an interesting-looking app for iOS called Bumper. I'll be honest and say I hadn't heard of Bumper before this. When it launched a couple of months ago, it seems basically to have been a voice note recording app with some basic editing features. The developers have now added an import function, so in theory you could pull in pre-recorded intros or adverts and actually put together your own little podcast using the app. Now hopefully I've understood correctly how it works. I'm going to try and give Bumper a go this week, so I will report back on the next episode of the podcast to let you know how it goes. Okay, in my mind I can hear Rob Walsh now of Libsyn saying, "It's not an industry ranking." Yes, that's right, Podtrac has released its podcast chart for August 2016, which ranks the most listened to podcasting publishing companies that subscribe to their ranking service. Now, you'll have heard me repeat Rob's comments before that Podtrac title their chart the Podcast Industry Ranking. Rob did say that he was going to write an article highlighting this if Podtrac didn't change the name, so I'm sure we're going to hear more about this on the next episode of Libsyn's own podcast, The Feed. For interest, NPR remains at number 1 in the chart, with a unique monthly US audience of 8.5 million, with nearly 62 million unique streams and downloads globally. Those figures, of course, are spread across the 33 shows that NPR currently put out. For the rest of the chart, you'll have to read it yourself, and of course you'll find a link in the show notes. Some news about podcasting measurement standards now. I think I last mentioned the IAB back in episode 11. The Interactive Advertising Bureau aims to help the media and marketing industries thrive in the digital economy. Basically, the IAB undertakes research, provides education and develops best practices and standards around digital advertising. They've got over 650 member companies, and those companies together account for apparently 86% of online advertising in the United States. Now, the IAB has a podcast technical working group that's been working together now for more than a year, and they've just published a paper called the Podcast Ad Metrics Guidelines. The aim of the guidelines is to define a set of common ad metrics for the podcasting industry. Now, obviously, they come at this from the advertiser's perspective mainly, and it's mostly about measurements that will help advertising agencies and their clients better understand the engagement of listeners to podcasts. You can visit the IAB site to download the guidelines in PDF format yourself. It's not a long document, only 14 pages in total. What I like about these guidelines is that it provides a great introduction to the topic and provides clear definitions for various terms that people in podcasting tend to use differently, and I think this can only be helpful. I'm talking here about the differences, say, between someone listening to an online podcast as opposed to someone streaming a podcast. What is good is that the working group have recognised how key Apple are to podcast metrics, or of course to the lack of them. They note that because Apple do not provide metrics themselves, and of course that because they're such a major player in the space, that this is always going to hamper any measurement approach. If you're at all interested in podcast stats, and this is well worth a read, if you're a podcaster who takes adverts for your own shows, then you should definitely be looking to familiarise yourself with the kind of terms that the paper talks about. Another article now from Adweek's series, The New Golden Age of Audio. This is a well-written, in-depth piece by Lauren Johnson titled Major brands are betting big on podcasts, and it seems to be paying off. The gist of the article is discussing whether these big companies are starting to see branded podcasts as a possible replacement for their company blogs. Lauren mentions companies such as General Electric and Netflix that are getting excited by the high levels of engagement that podcasts typically see. Now, what's interesting is that many of these large companies that are looking to start their own podcasts are actually choosing to partner with established podcast production companies rather than trying to do it all in-house themselves. This, of course, gives them access to experienced podcasters and broadcasters with the kind of technical expertise needed to produce high-quality podcasts from the very start. A good example of this is eBay. They've partnered with Gimlet Media, who of course also produced the well-known Startup podcast. The branded podcasts being produced are actually quite subtle. They often only mention the client company a few times. The aim is generally to provide valuable content in the same kind of field that the company's in, and of course then to build trust in the brand. And that's no different from most independent podcasters are using podcasts to help build their own businesses. The author makes it clear this is a very specialised part of podcast production that requires real creativity. I can see this being a real niche skill for podcast producers to try and develop, and of course then they can build themselves a network of clients to make podcasts for. Do check out the full article on the Adweek blog, a link in the show notes of course at richarddally.com/17. Lastly for this episode, let's talk about International Podcast Day 2016. This year the date's been set as the 30th of September. International Podcast Day describes itself as being dedicated to promoting podcasting worldwide through education and public engagement. I believe this is the third year that the event's been organised, and it's all about raising awareness of podcasts and podcasting. The organisers of International Podcast Day suggest a few ways that podcasters can get involved themselves, such as explaining podcasting to people you know who may never have heard of or even know what a podcast is. On their website at internationalpodcastday.com you can download banners and logos to use on your website or to temporarily replace your social media logos with. They also have audio and video promos that you can insert into your own podcast. Other suggestions they make are to think about perhaps hosting a meetup or giving away something on your podcast. And of course, posting pictures of your studio on social media sounds like fun. They even suggest a hashtag to use, #PodcastDay. There will also be a live social stream on the day itself. Head on over to internationalpodcastday.com for more details of the event. I will be talking more about this and my plans around the event over the next couple of weeks.
International Podcast Day is September 30th, and you can help spread the word. International Podcast Day is dedicated to promoting podcasting worldwide. You may be asking, what can I do to get involved? It's pretty simple. First, head over to internationalpodcastday.com and check the suggestions. Second, use #PodcastDay to join in the conversation. Remember September 30th. Now, let's start the conversation.
I'll end the episode this week as usual with the Where Can You Meet Me feature. Next Thursday, the 15th of September, I will be attending the Podcasting Micro Conference organised by the Institute for Learning, Innovation and Development at the University of Southampton. Speakers at this event include Mike and Isabella Russell of UK Podcasters, New Media Europe and Music Radio Creative, as well as Kevin Field from the podcast Radio Skills for Podcasters. The following week, the 19th of September, I will be at James Quidlan's next radio conference in London. And I'm also planning to attend Rain Summit Europe in London, which is on the Wednesday, the 2nd of November. Okay, so that's all from the Richard Daly podcast for this week. If you visit my website at richarddally.com, you'll find all my social media links, as well as the various ways you can subscribe to this show. The show notes for this episode are at richarddally.com/17. As usual, please send me your questions or comments, and if there is a topic you'd like me to cover, then you can tweet me. Thank you for listening, and I will see you on the next episode.